And so today, on this Holy Thursday, we celebrate these two very important aspects of our faith that all happened at one single event, where at the Last Supper, Jesus instituted the Eucharist, the bread of life, and the priesthood, the vehicle by which we receive the graces of the sacraments. And on this very special night, especially for us priests, as this is our kind of our birthday, if you will, tonight and our ordination days are two big celebrations for us. I thought in my prayer of two priests that came to mind. And it's fitting to discuss both aspects of priesthood. And so as baptized Catholics, we all share in the eternal priesthood of Jesus. All of us are baptized as priests, prophets, and kings. And so all of us are priests, whether we're ordained priests or not. And we'll kind of talk about that difference this evening, because the first priest in my life that comes to mind is actually my dad. And he's not an ordained priest, Lord no. But my dad, and what priesthood is meant to be, has always been a great example of priesthood. So oftentimes we can get confused when we hear that we're baptized into a priesthood that we call it the baptismal priesthood, that everyone shares, different from the ordained priesthood. So the question has to be asked, well, what is a priest? It also kind of confuses people and causes the question to be asked when we look at many of our Protestant brothers and sisters who do not refer to their parish or pastoral leaders as priests. They're generally called pastors or reverends or whatever. They don't take the title priest because of our difference in theology, right? So a priest is someone who offers a sacrifice. So we see that all throughout the Old Testament. We even see that distinction in many of the pagan religions of the ancient world and beforehand, that you were a priest if you offered a sacrifice to the gods or to your God. The priest was the sacrifice offerer, right? And so now in our baptismal priesthood, how do we translate that into the sacrifices? Well, this is why I think of my dad. We're all called through baptism to sacrifice ourselves. We're all called to be Jesus, right? In baptism, we put on Christ. We become Jesus at our baptism. So we have to live our life as Jesus lived his. We see that perfectly in this example in the gospel of washing feet, right? Jesus is showing us what that baptismal priesthood looks like. It looks like the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, God Almighty, getting on his hands and knees and washing the feet of his followers, of his disciples. Something that was just unheard of, which is why Peter, thinking it was completely beneath God to do this, tries to tell Jesus, like, you are not washing my feet. You are God. I am not. You should not be washing my feet. Yet Jesus shows us again what this servant leadership looks like. What it means to sacrifice ourselves for the good of others. It does not always have to look like a crucifixion, right? Sometimes it looks as simple as getting down and doing some dirty grunt work that we may think is beneath us, but it is not. So all the way back to my dad now. So my father, while he is not the most pious man nor the most patient man, my dad is far from perfect. I'm sure he's watching this now in Vegas, and he's probably laughing. But anyway, my dad, though, while he's not a perfect man, he was always like the prime hospitality guy. Like, my dad is the first to cook a giant meal for anybody who shows up. My dad cannot cook for just him, my mom, and I. There were 3 of us in the house. He always cooked for 30. My dad was always willing to use our house to throw family parties. More often than not, our Thanksgiving was kind of like the land of misfit toys. We had family from both my mom and dad's side of the family who had nowhere to go on Thanksgiving. We had friends from the seminary or friends that I grew up with who may not have had anywhere to go on Thanksgiving. It just kind of was a hodgepodge of people in our home because my dad was just that hospitable. Even Christmas Day sometimes, my father and some of my relatives would come over to our house on Christmas Eve and they'd make this big Italian dinner. It took all day to cook all of this fish. And then on Christmas Day, my dad would still invite other people over to our house and cook again on Christmas Day. When I think of hospitality, I just have to think of my dad. When I was in Scouts, my dad was the one to come on every camping trip and set up all the kitchen stuff, and he had all of us doing different things, and at the time it was really annoying, but now looking back, I really appreciate all of these things that my dad did for all of my groups of friends, and all of it was his own self-sacrifice, right? My dad will be the first to tell you that he would rather be sitting out in a lawn chair smoking a cigar than in a kitchen cooking or cleaning something or packing a car or a scout trailer. He would rather just be sitting and relaxing. But he would sacrifice that to do things, not just because I'm a son, he did them because I was a son, but he did them out of a sincere gift of self and a sincere love, not just for me, but for my friends as well. My dad really lived out his baptismal priesthood in a very humbling way. So that's one example of good priesthood. The other is an ordained priest. He was my priest growing up, and so I feel like I'm kind of following his footsteps. He was newly ordained and an associate pastor at my home parish, so he's known me since I was in kindergarten. And then through a series of events, he became the pastor of my home parish. It was his first assignment as an associate. He became pastor, much like I have done here. He ended up being at our parish for 16 years, which, knock on wood, I'll be here that long, if not a little longer. And he really showed me what it looks like to be an ordained priest. It was because of Father Larry that I started thinking about priesthood. And it's not necessarily because of any great thing he did. He'll be the first to tell you that he's not a great preacher. He's a good preacher. He has very nice homilies. But he would say it's not one of his gifts. So it had nothing really to do with liturgy, but it was just seeing him joyfully live his priesthood that started to make me ask the question, could I see myself doing that? He would bring his N64 into our classrooms, and he would have Mario Kart tournaments with us when he was supposed to be the substitute teacher. We didn't learn a thing, we just played Mario Kart all day. Not all day, but for the class period. He'd be outside at recess, throwing footballs around, and I mean, really, he probably only did those things like once, but because he did it once, I feel like it was just a regular part of his ministry. When I got into high school and started joining our high school youth group, he was right there with our youth minister, going on retreats with us, taking us camping, being at our weekly meetings. He was just always very involved as our pastor and our parish priest. And seeing him joyfully live his priesthood is what started getting me to ask, can I see myself doing that? And so now as a priest, I always ask myself, first, what would Jesus do? Because Jesus is the eternal high priest that I want to emulate. It's Jesus who I should be. But then I always go back to Father Larry. And is this something Father Larry would have done when we were in grammar school? And is this the kind of priest, is this what he would do for his parish? It says, Father Larry and my dad are really those two examples of priesthood for me. I mention that because tonight, as we celebrate the priesthood, while it is the ordained priesthood that Jesus instituted tonight, and it's that sacrificial priesthood that we look to and that we receive the Eucharist from, we're all called to make those sacrifices. In these days of the Triduum, not only tonight and as we take the Blessed Sacrament and go to the altar of repose this evening, and we meant to kind of image Jesus in the garden. Tomorrow, as we venerate the Holy Cross at our Good Friday service, And then as we kind of sit in that grand silence from Good Friday until the Easter Vigil, awaiting the resurrection, we're called to take an active role in the life of Jesus, in his passion and in his death, so that we can experience the resurrection. We have to find ways, like my dad did, like Father Larry does in his priesthood, to be self-sacrificial, to take up our crosses and to follow Jesus. Because it's only in taking our cross and following the way of the cross that we will get the resurrection. That's the only way that we will rise from the dead, if we take up our cross and we follow Jesus. And so let's begin now finding ways to do that through these Holy Triduum days, after the resurrection, after we get into the Easter season and we hear more about Jesus and his resurrection and how he appeared to people. How are we living our life in a sacrificial way that points to Jesus and bring others to follow Jesus as well?